Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. My reading week has been good, but frustrating on two fronts. Also, my BookTube making this week has been rather frustrating on many fronts. So let's get started with the books and then my lack of video making this week on BookTube. So, the first bit of frustration I had this week is with the Cundall History Prize. So I decided when the long list was announced, for those of you who don't know, the Cundall Prize is a prize that rewards excellence in history writing. I have had quite a bit of success with books that have won or been finalists or shortlisted for the Cundall. But this year's long list, I haven't had that much success. And this particular one was more fraught than the others. And that was Femina by Janina Ramirez. This is a history that looks at the women who have been written out or lost from history and trying to put them back in. And I very quickly realized that, at least for right now, this book is not for me. The introduction is, I don't quite know how to describe it. It really did not work for me. It basically is the story of a suffragette in the 1914, shortly before World War I broke out. And she basically interrupted a horse race, one of the major horse races in the UK, and stood in front of the king's horse and ended up getting trampled and died a few days later. And her story is brought up because she was a medievalist, and Ramirez describes her as having this vision of what the medieval world was like. And it's about where I kind of jumped from the introduction to the main sort of part of the book, which was basically the book form of a documentary special. Which it basically started off with new discoveries and then a spin-off of a subject-specific look at women's history. And I did not get on with what I read of this book at all. So I'm putting it down, I'm bailing, and I will come back to it sometime in the probably not too near future. It'll maybe be sometime next year to have another go at it, and hopefully, now that I know what its style is, I might have more success with it. We shall see. I will, at some point, report back. But I think as far as the rest of the Cundall is concerned, I'm probably going to check out because I'm just not getting on with them. So, I mean, I'll have a go at the other one that I've got, and then I'll probably return to the others at some point. I just don't know when. So that was Femina. Try to get this resettled. Let's see if that'll work. Might be about the only thing Chainsaw Man can do, right? So, one positive-ish, even though it did lead to the other bit of frustration I had this week on my reading. I read a few stories from Conan by Robert E. Howard. I'm reading them from this Del Rey 3-volume set. This one is The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. So I read 3 stories on Friday. The Phoenix on the Sword, which is the first Conan story. It's set during Conan's time as king of Aquilonia. And as much as most of, well, probably all, it's all of the Conan as king of Aquilonia stories, there's a conspiracy to dethrone him. In this case, a group of conspirators led by a brigand nobleman named Escalante have decided to assassinate Conan and place a distant relative of the former royal family on the throne. He would eventually be killed by Escalante, so Escalante could take the throne, but it never gets that far. Escalante is served by a fallen magician, Thothamon, who in his prime was the most powerful wizard in Stygia, but the source of his power was stolen from him, so he's now fairly powerless. And eventually Thothamon is sent to keep an eye out on the noble who they're going to set up as Conan's successor. And he just so happens, conveniently, to have Thothamon's ring. So Thothamon kills him and gets his ring back and summons an eldritch horror to go and kill Escalante. And everybody with him. Which then leads to Conan conveniently having a Deus Ex Machina dream where an ancient priest, wizard, who had long opposed Thothamon's patron deity Set to basically help Conan fight off the monstrosity that Thothamon sent. Which actually conveniently helps Conan defeat the conspirators who had set out to kill him. And then I read The Frost Giant's Daughter, which is set when Conan's younger, before he left the northern countries of Cimmerian, Vanaheim, and Asgard. And he basically pursues a daughter of Ymir, the Frost Giant. In a sort of was it real, was it not, that I often find rather annoying in fantasy. And then I read The God in the Bowl, which is another young Conan. This time he's a thief in Numidia who gets caught up in a murder mystery. The owner of this sort of museum temple is found dead by a guard. Conan is there, and it's eventually revealed that the killer is a snake man, or man snake, which is basically a snake with a human head. And I've never been particularly fond of that story. So those were the 3 that I read on Friday. And then on Saturday, I read Ancient Africa by Christopher Ehret. This is a history that tries to argues for Africa's inclusion into ancient global history and the importance of including Africa in global history. Africa, much like women throughout history, have been largely neglected by past historians. And so Ehret looks at how agriculture developed in Africa, how pottery developed in Africa, how Africa was one of the earliest sites for iron metallurgy, And he also looks at how Egypt is like sort of the African roots of ancient Egyptian culture and civilization. And it's a pretty good book. I thought it was very interesting, a bit dull in the writing. I really liked the chapter on Egypt. The conclusion was I had some issues with because it was very repetitious, and in fact, there is one whole passage about a paragraph in length that is a word for word copy and paste from an earlier chapter, and that kind of annoyed me. But on the whole, I rather liked Ancient Africa by Christopher Cole. So then on Sunday, I returned to The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian and read The Tower of the Elephant, The Scarlet Citadel, The Queen of the Black Coast, and started on Black Colossus. So The Tower of the Elephant is one of the great Conan stories. Most fans would probably say it's the greatest. It's another young Conan. He's in some city in Zamora where he hears of the Tower of the Elephant, a fabulous tower controlled by a wizard priest named Yara. He also hears of the Heart of the Elephant, which is a fantastical jewel that is the source of Yara's power. So Conan gets into a bit of a brawl at the beginning of the story, kills a man, and goes and hot-headedly decides he's going to rob the Tower of the Elephant. While he's breaking in, he meets another thief named Taurus, and they decide to team up, and they scale the tower after killing some lions in the garden. At the top of the tower, Taurus is killed by a giant spider, and Conan then descends down and meets Yakosha, who is basically a humanoid with an elephant's head. And Yag tells Conan of his story, his plight, his torture at the hands of Yara, and uses Conan as his instrument to enact a final revenge on Yara. And that scene is really interestingly done. And then Conan leaves as the tower collapses. So it's a pretty good story. The Scarlet Citadel is one of the King Conan stories, and like all of them, there is a conspiracy to dethrone Conan. This time, the main conspirators are two rival kings, the kings of Koth and the king of Ophir, who had been allied to Conan. So the king of Ophir calls on Conan's aid because the king of Koth is invading the king of Ophir's territory. Conan comes with 5,000 men, and he finds that Koth and Ophir have allied against him for some reason. I can understand Koth's reason for it. They're in an expansionist mood. The king of Koth is in an expansionist mood, so he wants to conquer some territory, and making Aquilonia a vassal state would be, fulfill his ambitions. I'm not entirely sure what Ophir's getting out of this. I'm not entirely sure Robert E. Howard quite knew what Ophir was getting out of this, except for, needing that story. Both kings are backed by a wizard named Sothalanti, who is the actual real power in Koth. So Conan is captured, taken to the Scarlet Citadel, Sothalanti's palace, and is offered terms. If Conan abdicates the throne in favor of Arpello, a another noble who has some blood claims to the Median throne, Aquilonian throne. He'll be let go. Conan refuses and goes into a really weird speech that I don't think Conan would ever actually make about taxes, but okay. So he's thrown in the dungeon. And in Salthalante's case, his dungeons are basically demonological zoo that has the only normal creature in it is a gigantic serpent named Satha, but everything else are eldritch abominations. While traversing this dungeon, Conan meets and rescues Salthalante's rival Pelias. And so they escape the dungeon. Pelias sends Conan to Aquilonia's capital, where he quickly dispatches Arpello and raises a new army to go and smash Ophir and Koth and knock off Salthalante's head, while Pelias goes and grabs it. The best part of the Scarlet Citadel is the dungeon, is Conan in the dungeon. That is absolutely a wonderful set of scenes, and Pelias is a hoot. The setup, the sort of how Conan got into the situation and the victory, I'm not particularly fond of that. And then Queen of the Black Coast is Conan is younger. Exactly how young is not entirely stated, but he's fleeing Argos, and he eventually comes into contact with Belit, a pirate captain who is called the Queen of the Black Coast. And so he joins her as her lover, and they go pirating together. Eventually, she decides she wants to sack a city located on a river of the dead, or a dead river. It's like a poisonous, toxic river. And when they come to the city, they find it in ruins, but there's still magical, or not magical, but there's still treasures there. So they're basically plundering the ruin. There's a lone remnant of the city's inhabitants who were angelic beings who have since become demonic. And this monster slaughters the crew, except for Conan, who conveniently got knocked out by some Black Lotus, and he had a dream about the history of the city. When he wakes up, he finds the crew slaughtered, including Belit, who is hanging from the ship, and Conan basically kills the servitors of the monster and the monster himself, with some help from Belit, which, if you've seen the film Conan the Barbarian, the one from the 80s starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, the scene where Valeria comes back from the dead to rescue Conan, that's where this scene comes from. I liked it, but I wasn't overly passionate about it. Just my reaction to these stories bugs me. It frustrates me, and I'll get to that here in a bit. But so I also wanted to get to Black Colossus, because I had a thought of just finishing up this book on Sunday, since my main reading plan kind of fell through. But with the first bit of Black Colossus, I recognized that I really wasn't into it. So I put the book down, and on Monday read, and pretty much through yesterday, I read 1923 by Mark William Jones. This is a history of the crisis year in the Weimar Republic. So that culminated in the infamous beer hall putsch in Munich in November of 1923. So the early years of the Weimar Republic, which was born out of the collapse of the German Empire at the end of World War I, was contested. While a majority supported the Republic, there were opponents of the Republic on the left and the right who engaged in terrorist action to destabilize the Republic in the hopes of either a communist revolution that would see a second communist state in Europe after the Soviet Union, or a right-wing putsch that would see either the restoration of the German monarchies or the institution of one of them as dictator. So 1923 started with the French invasion, or the French and Belgian invasion of the Ruhr. So as part of the Treaty of Versailles, the Rhineland, the westernmost part of Germany, was occupied by the victorious Allies. And the Ruhr, which was the industrial heartland of Germany, remained within the jurisdiction of the Weimar Republic. But Germany had a difficult time paying reparations and coming to terms with and agreeing to the payment plan for reparations. So the French Prime Minister Poincaré decided to just invade the Ruhr and try to extract the reparations that way. So for much of the year, the Germans in the Ruhr and throughout Germany engaged in passive resistance, where they refused to recognize the occupation, refused to engage with the occupiers, and things deteriorated for much of the year, eventually including economic chaos. The German currency entered into a period of insane hyperinflation, to where the exchange rate to the dollar was like trillions of marks to the dollar. It was insane. And eventually, towards the end of the year, things started to stabilize. But there came a moment in late 1923 where three forces had moments where, if they were successful, the Weimar Republic could have fallen. One was separatism. The French supported separatist movements in the Rhineland and the Ruhr to try to split them off from Germany, which failed due to mass popular resistance to the separatists. The communists took control in coalition with the SPD of two states in local states, Thuringia and Saxony, which the German government managed to quash, as assigned to Bavaria, which had gone into a bit of a independent dictatorship under Kahr, which ultimately sort of ended a few months later with the which took place after the beer hall putsch, which was led by Hitler and Ludendorff. So this was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. It was a fantastic look at 1923 in Germany and of how German democracy managed to survive, although the repercussions of what happened, the lack of, particularly when it came to dealing with Hitler and the Nazis, that pretty much began the slow erosion of confidence in Weimar democracy and Weimar democracy in general until it finally just withered in 1933. So it was really good. Kind of enjoyed it. So that leads me to today. One option is I could continue on with Conan. Because, I mean, September is in part Cimmerian September, in which participants read Robert E. Howard's Conan stories throughout the month. So I could just start back on Black Colossus and read through the rest of this book and maybe start on the others, as well as getting to the Space Opera Renaissance for Space Opera September, which is another September BookTube event. But I'm not enthusiastic. I'm not really all that interested in either one. I quickly realized last weekend that I really did not want to read the Space Opera Renaissance. And frustratingly, I'm not as interested in reading Conan as I thought I would be. I mean, the stories aren't doing it for me. I'm picking them apart. They're not really working on me how I want them to, which is frustrating because, like I've said so many times, science fiction and fantasy are my favorite genres of fiction. But for the last going on 4 years now, since the end of 2019, I have struggled immensely with enjoying science fiction and fantasy. And that continues. And I don't quite understand what happened. And yeah. So I think what I will be doing this reading week is, so today and over the weekend, I will read Bismarck's War by Rachel Chrastil. So this is a history of the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 1871 that resulted in the fall of Napoleon III and the unification of much of Germany as the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm I, which I'm really looking forward to. I dipped into it a bit, but while I had it on pre-order, and I really liked what I read. I read Steve Donahue's review, which is really good, so I'm really looking forward to Bismarck's War. And I think over the course of the work week, I'm going to read Two Houses, Two Kingdoms by Kathryn Hanley. This is a history of France and England from 1100 to 1300. So this is really, I'm quite looking forward to this as well. And I will report back on both next week. And hopefully my readings next week will be a lot more positive than this week and a lot less frustrating. Anyway, so that takes care of my reading. So the other frustration I had this week was in making BookTube videos. Like I mentioned on Tuesday, when I did my book haul, I had hoped that I would have had several videos up by that point. But they just did not work out. So some of the videos I wanted to make were a book or a discussion video about my history collection, the history wall, that I'm running out of space, and I need to decide if I want to just keep the history wall how it is and just weed out the books I don't want, or if I should expand it. And so I was going to do a discussion about that and maybe elicit some advice from commenters, or just come to a decision, which I think that's what I'm going to do. So, well, I guess I want to talk about the other frustrations or the other failed videos I tried to make this week that I'm hoping maybe I can get to next week if I retool things. So the other one was about writing. So Steve Donahue has recently talked, since we're getting close to November and National Novel Writing Month, Steve Donahue tends to like to kind of make calls to write videos. And I wanted to respond to that. But because on the one hand, I could kind of talk about like some projects I have that have kind of at the seed stage that I could sort of work through as during the next few months, which I think is what Steve is wanting, since I think a lot of this is the dearth of AuthorTube. But there were kind of there are two sort of buts with this plan. One is that I'm not a big fan of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. It doesn't work for me. And I think doing the video talking about those projects or the possible projects might give the impression that I'm going to do NaNoWriMo when I probably don't really want to. And then the other problem is, of course, if you followed my channel for any length of time, my issue with actually enjoying fiction. Again, since 2019, I have had massive struggle enjoying any science fiction and fantasy. And when it comes to other genres, that struggle is even longer. So how do I gin up the passion, the enthusiasm for writing a novel when I'm not really that interested in reading? I don't know how I'm going to work that one out. Because that's a doozy of a problem, which I do want to kind of go through over this weekend and see, because I do want to address it, because I think it would be interesting of finding the passion to write when you're not passionate about fiction. And is there alternatives or something? I don't know. I'll figure it out. And then I also wanted to talk a bit about hobbies, because a few days ago, or about a week ago, when I was putting my mom to bed, she said I needed a new hobby, which is probably true. I think there's a few other discussion videos I wanted to do, but they didn't quite work out. So hopefully I will be able to do some of these next week. And if not, then, well, they just never really came to fruition, which is a bummer, because I would like to do more discussion videos rather than just tag videos. Oh, speaking of which, there was also a tag video that came out, or that made the rounds this week, that I wanted to do, but I couldn't, because, to be honest, I'm not a fan of Shakespeare. Shakespeare has never really done it for me, so the temptation to be a bit of a brat in that Shakespeare journey tag was a little too much, so I didn't do it. So hopefully, next week's reading and booktube video making will be a lot better. But anyway, booktube, I have gone on way too long for this video, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for now. So until I see you next week, thank you, have a great weekend, and stay safe, and try to stay cool, because today it's going to be about 108 here in Texas, but the corner is approaching. Next week it should be in the low 90s and upper 80s, which is about where it should be. So, and hopefully it stays there and does not go back up to 100, because I am rather tired of the constant calls for conservation from ERCOT. But anyway, so until next week, BookTube, thank you and stay safe.